Jackery is a name that's been in the business of solar generators or power stations for a long time. They pretty much helped define the category of electronics, but over the years, other competitors have jumped in on the game, and some might say they even passed them. Companies like EcoFlow and Anchor and Blue Eddy, they're all putting out great products, and they're helping Jackery kind of stay up to date. Now, Jackery was the first power station that I ever bought, and it was just a small little portable battery backup thing, and I used it for a while until I got a couple of newer ones that had better features. And over the years, I never really went back to Jackery because I didn't think the value was there. The newer features on the EcoFlows and the Blue Eddies were amazing. Their price per watt hour was amazing, and it wasn't until Jackery put out this little guy that I even bought something with their name on it again. But that's until now. I got my hands on a big boy here, and that's what we're going to be taking a look at today. This is the Jackery Explorer 1000, and I'm excited to test it out. I got it on a great deal, so without any further ado, let's open this thing up and see what we got. Alright, so this is more what you're expecting to see when we say the word Jackery. You're expected to see this iconic orange color that a lot of people are duplicating in this line of electronics, but we all know that Jackery was the first. And yes, we're looking at the Jackery Explorer 1000. It's basically 10 of these all rolled up into one with a bunch of extra features, of course. This thing has a ton of power and a good battery size, and we are going to be putting it to the test. And with this type of unit, we're stepping into a little different category than a lot of the reviews I've done so far. A lot of the reviews I've done have been in the 300 watt hour or smaller category, and those type of units are great for, emergency power to keep your phones and tablets and stuff like that charged. Maybe your cable modems and routers at home charged during a power outage, or going on a little day trip, powering up some lights at night when you're camping. But this goes into a different category altogether. This can be emergency backup at home. It can run much bigger appliances. It can run for longer, but also a great unit for camping. Just depends on what you got to run and how long you want it to run, and we'll talk about all those specs once we get this thing out of the box. So speaking of that, it's a pretty box, but it's not doing us any good. Let's go ahead and open it up and take all the different parts out and see what's inside. Alright, so here it is, the Jackery Explorer 1000, and in the box it doesn't come with much. It comes with an instruction manual here, and it comes with a big honkin' AC cord. So this is what's going to be charging this unit from the wall. I've got a bunch of these. Luckily it's the same standard input as a lot of these power stations, but I'm not going to confuse this cable with the other ones. It's nice and orange, so that's always a nice touch. But this is a big boy, but it's compact for the specs that it's got. It's around 22 pounds or so. It'll get your attention when you pick it up, but it's definitely something you can carry without a cart. It's got a nice strong handle on the top here. Let me pan up to show you. And the handle does fold all the way down within the confines of the unit itself, so that's nice. We've got everything we need to control it and use it right here in the front, except for the inputs, and we'll look at those in just a second. So basically everything you got on the front is all your outputs. You got your screen. We've got a light that we'll test out in just a second. The 12 volt accessory port, our USB ports over here, and then our AC ports over there. Everything's got its own dedicated button to turn on. So we got an AC button for the AC, we got a DC button for the USBs, and we've got the light button for the light. Another nice thing is that all the specifications are right here written on the front. So we know exactly which of these ports has which specifications as far as output power. And if you ever need to know the voltages and currents and everything like that, they're all stamped on the back. There's a sticker on the back that has all those specifications, as well as in the book and written on the box itself. So speaking of specifications, let's go ahead and go through some of the important ones. The main two important ones when you're looking at something like this is the output power. That means how much power can it generate out, and we're usually talking about the AC when we're talking about that kind of power. And then the battery capacity, that's the second one that's real big, because it doesn't matter how much power you can put out. If you don't have enough battery capacity, it won't be able to run that for very long. So like I said, right here in the front, it says 1500 watts out. So combined between these three AC plugs, you could have a combined output of power of 1500 watts, and it will surge up to 3000. But I never tested anything for a surge. I just look at the main specification itself. So 1500 watts, that's pretty impressive. Normally a unit this size may have like 1000 or 1200 watts. So having 1500 watts is nice. But again, the more power that you're able to put out, the more battery that's going to eat up. So let's talk about the battery capacity. and they make it pretty easy to remember what the capacity is, because again, it's written right here in front, the Jackery Explorer 1000. It's got roughly 1000 watt hours. It's actually 1070, but we'll just call it 1000 for ease of math and everything. But 1000 watt hours of battery, and they are lithium iron phosphate batteries, or LiFePO4 batteries, which means you're going to get about 10 years expected life out of them, 4,000 recharge cycles. Those are the type of batteries that you definitely want to look for if you're in the market for a power station. So 1500 watts out AC, 1070 watt hours of battery, and then all the rest of the stuff here, let's go over that. Going next with the DC outputs here on the USB ports, again listed right on front. We got two USB-Cs, one is going to be rated for 30 watts max, one's going to be rated for 100 watts max, and then we've got a USB-A here of 18 watts max for charging smaller electronics like phones and stuff like that. We got the cigarette lighter plug here, or the auto accessory plug, 12 volts, 10 amps. That's pretty standard. And then, like I said, we got a light over here. So let's go ahead and turn that on. After you turn the station on itself, then you can just turn the light on like that. So let's go ahead and boot up the power station. And then push the button once to turn it on. Push it again to get brighter. And then push it a third time for it to blink an SOS signal. And then push it one more time to turn it off. Now once the thing's turned on, we've got a display here that shows the input power and the output power and then the battery life. And once it starts doing something, whether it's recharging or whether it's powering something, it's going to tell you either how long it's going to take to completely fill up the batteries, if it's in the charging mode, or if it's outputting power, it's going to tell you how much time it thinks it's going to run for before it runs out of batteries. Now we're going to test all the charging and discharging on this thing because it is capable of doing pass-through charging and also working as UPS mode. So we'll talk about that once we start testing those out. And then you can see we've got some indicators here showing Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. There is an app that you can hook this thing up. So I will download that and we'll test that out and see what the app can do for us. But first things first, let's go ahead and get this thing charging. It's supposed to charge up in about an hour, which is pretty impressive. If it's 1000 watt hours, that means it's going to be pulling close to 1000 watts from the wall. So you definitely want to know which outlet you're plugging into at your house so you don't blow a circuit. So let me go ahead and get this cable plugged into something and we'll watch this thing charge up a little bit. All right, so I got it plugged into the wall. And again, make sure that you've got it plugged into an outlet that you know is going to be able to handle whatever it starts to draw. You might not want to plug it into a power strip unless you know that power strip can handle that much current. So the manual says that the charge mode AC input is 100 to 120 volts, 60 hertz, 15 amps max. Now it doesn't list an amount of wattage. Simple math would tell us that would be 1500 to 1800 watts max, but I don't think we're going to see that. You wouldn't want a device pulling full 15 amps from your circuit because most of your breakers in the house are going to be 15 amp circuits. So the only place that it lists watts is the bypass mode AC input output, showing that it's also 100 to 120 volts, 60 hertz, but 1500 watts. So bypass mode means that you've got it plugged into the wall, it's charging up the batteries, but then if you plug something into an AC port, instead of going through the inverter and using the batteries to power up these ports, it's basically bypassing the batteries, going straight to the wall, just like you plug something into the wall. And in that case, the power is going to go right from the wall, right through this unit, and then right to the device that you've plugged in. Now that's assuming that you have power at the wall. If the power goes out, just like a UPS, this thing's going to switch over to the batteries. In about 20 milliseconds, it says, it's going to switch over, so whatever you had plugged in there will continue to stay powered as long as you've got battery life left in your power station. So far I'm just seeing about 364 watts coming into this thing. It says it'll take about 2.5 hours to fully charge from this 29% up to 100. So I'm going to guess when they talk about charging the thing up in an hour in their marketing literature, that they're talking about charging it up from the wall and from solar at the same time. Now the solar input looks like it can have 400 watts max coming in. There's two different solar ports that we'll look at in just a second. But that 400 watts added to the 360 watts coming from the wall, that may be where they're getting that information about charging in 1 hour. I would have liked to seen this thing ramp up a little bit higher than 364 watts, but maybe it needs to get to a certain battery percentage, or maybe there's something in the app that dictates how fast that it charges from the wall. Sometimes they have limits so that you don't accidentally blow circuits in your house unless you know what you're doing. So with that being said, let's go ahead and grab the app and we'll look at this real quick before we start testing the outputs. Alright, so I've got the app downloaded and installed, and I've got this power station already sunk up with it. And downloading and creating your account was super easy. Just give it an email address and password, of course. It found the device right away over Bluetooth. And that's how these things usually work. They hook up Bluetooth first, which means you got to be pretty close to it. And then once you hook it up Bluetooth, then you can share your Wi-Fi SSID and password with it, and then it'll be hooked up over Wi-Fi. That way you can talk to it from anywhere in the house, and then you can also see it if you're away from the house. So I will mention that it had a little bit of problem with my Wi-Fi to begin with. It requires 2.4 gigahertz instead of 5 gigahertz, and I do have 2.4, but first couple times it failed. But I tried a different SSID that I had in the house, which is the guest one, and it worked on that one. So I'm not sure why it didn't work on the main one. Every other smart device I have in my house works on my main SSID, but it's working now. So it's hooked up Wi-Fi. It shows basically on the screen, same thing we see on the device itself, what the battery percentage is, what the input and output wattage is, and then we haven't hooked anything up to the DC yet, so we can look at that in just a second. Now I took a quick look in the settings, and there is some settings in there that are interesting, so we'll take a look at that while we've got it right here in front of us. And we're going to go right to this emergency charging one here. And it says that this is, let's go ahead and read it. For emergency situations only, employs rapid wall charging to quickly power up the device. It is not recommended for regular use. So you know what that means. That means we've got to push that button and see what it does, see how many watts it pulls. So let's go ahead and toggle that on. And it says that this toggle will actually turn itself off after it's completely full. That's pretty cool. So that's a good tip. So it is on. Let's see what we got going on here. So far, no change. Let's see if we have to go back to the main screen. Alright, so I let it sit there for a couple of minutes and nothing seemed to change other than the little circle. It looked like it was going around and round faster. Input wattage didn't change any. The time to charge didn't change any. When I toggled it off, it did kind of go down to 200 and something and then came back up to 360. But let's go ahead and try to toggle that again and see what happens. So we got that toggled back on again. And again, it looks like the circle is going faster. So we'll let this sit while we talk about the rest of it. But for right now, I'm just a little confused. Circle's going faster, but doesn't look like it's charging any faster. But we'll give it a minute, see what happens. Alright, so while it's thinking about how fast it wants to charge, let's go ahead and start testing out some of these other things. Let's test out the DC USB side here. I'm going to start with this 30 watt port here. Let's turn that on. And I'm just going to plug it into this other Jackery here because it's got a screen that shows exactly how much power it's pulling in. Let's go ahead and plug that in. And it recognized it right away. It's going to be kind of hard to see on there, but it's showing about 25, 26 watts coming in there. So that's good. So let's go ahead and change that down to the 100 watt port. And obviously to do this, you want to make sure that your cable is capable of 100 watts. I know that these cables here are made by Anchor and they're 240 watt capable. And this device here, it's not ramping up to 100. I'm not sure if it's based on the fact that it's got a 72% charge and it doesn't think it needs to charge fast. But let's go ahead and grab a different device and plug it in and see if we can show a full 100 watts coming out of there. Alright, so when in doubt, grab yourself an Anchor product because now we're showing 101 watts coming out here on the Jackery. And if we pull this guy in here, you can see we got about 94, 95 watts coming in. So that is definitely working. Now, interesting enough, we did pull in another 100 watts or so from the wall. So it's smart enough to know, let's pull some more power because we got 100 watts going out. So it's going to pull an extra 100 watts coming in. So it looks like the pass-through charging is working for the DC also. So let's go ahead and turn off the DC output or unplug this cable and see if this input power goes down again. Yep, and sure enough it went down. The 2 hours charge time still stayed the same, so it knew that it was going to charge the same rate when it was pulling in 100 extra watts because that 100 extra watts was going out through the DC. But now we're back down to 360 watts coming in. So let's go ahead and grab something for the AC ports. We'll test those out, and we should expect to see the pass-through charging working for that too. Alright, so to test the AC output, I'm not going to grab something that's 1500 watts, but I am going to grab this little space heater here. It's got two settings on it. It should be in the 2 to 500 watt range, I believe, between those two settings. So let's go ahead and plug that in and plug on the AC output. Now as soon as I plug that on, now this thing isn't doing anything yet. So I don't have this turned on yet. But we've still got 363 watts coming in. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on this heater on the low setting. And you probably hear that fan in there. Maybe you hear that fan. So we are outputting 231 watts. And interesting enough, the input wattage didn't change any, but the charge time didn't change any either. So I'm guessing that's just at this point showing how many watts are coming into the DC, into the batteries. And then this is just completely bypassing. And I guess that makes sense since we were using DC before. It would show how much power is coming into the batteries because it was going straight back out of the battery. There was no inverter in that case. So it looks like bypass is working. Let's go ahead and turn this up the next notch. So now we got 464 watts coming out. And it's showing that it'll run that for 99.9 hours. Of course, that's because it's not running off a battery. It's just coming right from the wall. So our next set of tests, we are going to disconnect the input here so that we just see the output only going through the inverter. But we've got a little indicator up here in the top that shows that it's got AC power coming out. So far everything is working great. Let's go ahead and turn everything off. I'm going to disconnect the input power, and then we're just going to test this AC back out by itself without any AC coming in. Alright, so the cable is disconnected. We've got 0 input, 0 output. I've got the AC inverter turned off. Let's go ahead and turn this on. So I hear a little click in there. It's saying that the inverter's on. I've got the indicator up here showing that the inverter is on. Still nothing coming out. We do have a clock there saying how long it's going to stay like this, just because even with nothing being powered, the inverter is still taking a little bit of battery power. So let's go ahead and turn this heater back on the low setting. And now we see we got 239 watts coming out, nothing coming in. So we're sitting at 42% battery power. It looks like this will run for about 1.9, 1.8 hours. And there's probably nothing worse that you can plug in energy efficiency wise than just a straight little electric heater like this. So let's go ahead and turn this back up. So the inverter is handling this 500 watts just fine. It's dropping down now below an hour. So this kind of gives you an idea, emergency power wise, if you needed to heat your house during maybe a snowstorm or something and you lost power, you gotta kind of have your expectations in check on how much heat you can produce with a little battery like this. There's much more efficient ways to heat than this little tiny space heater like this. But without any kind of power coming in, maybe solar power, solar panels or something, you're not going to be able to heat a house for very long. But it's working exactly how it should. Let's go ahead and turn this back off. And turn the inverter back off. So like I said, so far so good. Everything's working as expected. Alright, so I plugged the cable back in, and you may notice that the number here is a lot higher. So I'm wondering if once I toggled that setting in the app, I had to actually, it was assuming that I had it unplugged, and I had to actually plug it in. So it is pulling now 800 watts from the wall. And when it first started charging, it was charging over 1,000 watts. So now it's showing from this 42% to charge it all the way up, it's going to be right at about an hour. So I'm glad to see that that emergency charging toggle did do something. I guess it's just a matter of repowering the station to get it to activate. And I just happened to check back in the app, and even after rebooting the app, I looked at it. It does not show that the emergency charging is toggled on. So I don't know if it's something that toggles in the station here, and then it turns it off in the app like it said it was going to, so that once it's all the way charged up, it's not going to do that again. But just for the fun of it, let's go ahead and toggle it back on and see if anything happens. So we're still sitting at, it was 800 watts, now it's about 600 watts. So let's go ahead and toggle this back on. And I don't know if that did something, but it's definitely climbing back up again. Up to now it's at 1,000 watts. And the fan inside is getting higher. I don't know if you can hear that, but the fan is ramping up as the electronics inside and the batteries inside probably get a little bit warmer. That fan's going to kick on, and it does have in the app the temperature of the batteries. They're sitting at 22 degrees Celsius right now. and we're at 1100 watts coming out of the wall. So this is more what I'd like to see, but I like the way that they list this as emergency power, because you should not have to do this in a normal scenario. Let's say you were planning for a trip and you wanted to take this thing with you, maybe a camping trip or a road trip or something. You would just charge it up overnight the night before you went, and it would charge up at whatever speed it charges up at, and you'd be fine. So the only time that I can think that you would need emergency charging is if you're just about to go out that trip and you're packing the car up and you remembered, uh-oh, did we charge up the Jackery or not? And again, it shouldn't be sitting in your house at 0% at any time. But if it was, half full or something, you'd want it to be able to charge up in a half an hour before you went out on the road. So I like that that's disabled by default, and it makes you, understand what you're doing when you click that on. So that being said, I'm going to go ahead and toggle this back off. And right away, this thing did ramp down. The fan ramped down, the charging ramped down, and now it's sitting around 400 to 500 watts, and it's ramping back up to 700. So I'm not exactly sure what dictates how fast it charges, but there's a couple other things in the app that I thought was interesting. So there is the charge settings, and this wasn't available when I had it set to emergency mode, but in regular mode, we've got fast charging mode or quiet charging mode. So let me go ahead and select quiet charging mode. Fast charging was default. And now I've got a little speaker indicator up here that shows that it's in quiet charging mode, and the input is dropped all the way down to 266 watts. And I'm guessing the thing that's quiet is the fan. Obviously is either turned off or spun down pretty slow. So if you had this charging overnight in your bedroom or something, you might not want that fan running the whole time. So that's a nice little feature. I'll go ahead and set that back to normal. And then the other thing that they have is the battery settings. And I know it's kind of hard to see on the screen here, but the battery settings have either a full use mode or a battery savings mode. And it's got a nice little picture here to dictate what it's doing. It's by default set in full use mode, which means it's going to allow you to charge it all the way up to 100%, and it's going to allow you to discharge it all the way down until it cuts off. But if we set it to battery saving mode, it'll limit the power consumption and charge capacity. So now on the picture, where it used to say 0 on the bottom and 100% on the top, now it says 15% on the bottom and 85% on the top. So it just limits the charging cycle and the usage cycle, and it says that it will extend the battery life approximately 30%. You'd have to do a lot of testing to prove that, but I'm just going to leave it at the default of full use. Now the last thing I want to show in the app that's really nice feature is the auto off time. And the auto off time has several settings: 2 hours, 8 hours, 12, 24, and never. And what that basically means is if you've got this thing powered on, whether it's outputting something or not, when do you want it to automatically turn off? So maybe you've got something really low powered on here. Maybe you're just trickle charging something, or you've got a real low power device that doesn't draw much. You wouldn't want this machine to think that there's nothing coming out of it and just turn off by itself. So you can set that to never turn off, so that these AC outlets should always be live, or if you're plugging something into the DC outlets, maybe it'll always be live. Alright, so we tested the charging, we tested the discharging. Everything works pretty cool. A little confused by the input charging, but we did get it to ramp up pretty high, and we got it to go pretty low. So I guess finding somewhere in the middle for normal use is probably where most people will use it. But everything's working great. The last thing I want to show you here on the side is going to be the DC inputs. So we got the big cable here for the AC input. Then we've got 2 barrel jacks over here labeled DC input. And the specification book here is a little confusing. It shows 2 times DC 8mm ports, 12 to 16 volts working voltage, 8 amps max. So you could possibly have 2 like 100 watt solar panels plugged into those, and you'd have a max of like 200 watts coming in. But then the next line says double to 8 amps max, 16 to 60 volts working voltage, 10.5 amps max, and then double to 21 amps, 400 watts max. So maybe if you get solar panels that have up to 61 volts, you can get up to 200 watts on each one, with a total of 400 watts coming in combined. Now Jackery's always used these kind of barrel plugs instead of an XT60 solar input, and they didn't include any conversion cables, but on Amazon you can get conversion cables from just about any type of solar panel to Jackery's barrel plugs. You can also buy, as an option, and it shows in the book, a cigarette lighter plug to this barrel adapter here. so that you can charge this thing from your car. Just plug the cable into your cigarette lighter of your car, plug the other end into here, and as you're driving down the road, you could charge your Jackery up probably about 100 watts on that type of hookup. And even if Jackery didn't include the solar adapters for these plugs here, it would have been nice if they did include that cigarette lighter charging plug. Now, it would obviously take a long time at 100 watts to charge this thing up to full, but 100 watts driving down the road is better than nothing. So for the couple bucks that it would have cost Jackery to include that cable, that would have been a nice touch compared to the probably 20 bucks that we'd have to spend to buy that cable from them. But I'll leave some links down in the description below on different types of adapters and different types of charger cables that you can use for this. So I think that's going to just about cover everything for this video. If you have any questions on things I didn't cover, go ahead and drop those down in the comments below. Hopefully this video was helpful to you. If it was, I appreciate a thumbs up. That certainly helps out the channel. Let me know down in the comments what you think about Jackery as a brand and Jackery, in this case, as this device. I can tell you that ever since I bought this little guy here, the Explorer 100 Plus, I use it honestly daily, and I've been really impressed with it, and I was happy to finally get a big power station like this to add to my home collection here. But I think that's going to do it for this one. Go ahead and check out the rest of the channel. Lots of other reviews on power stations and solar generators and all kinds of geeky stuff. But I thank you as always for watching, and until next time, peace out and geek out.